so many different projects and tours and...
There are mercifully... No, it's good. I'm going to lean right there. There are mercifully people in my world who make sure that I'm always where I need to be when I'm supposed to be somewhere. But honestly, you know, it's just you spin a bunch of plates because some plates don't keep spinning. You know, at a certain point they stop. Comic Book Men stops every year and we don't know whether it's coming back or not. So at that point you don't want to be sitting around going, what do we do until then? Like I learned early on in this job, it's nice to be able to like swing from web to web throughout your career. Otherwise you'll sit around in some periods bored, fallow, doing nothing. So I tend to kind of keep a lot of things going. Sometimes they stack up and that becomes difficult, but I'd rather have too much to do than like, you know, sitting around. Like I remember waiting for the green light on Zach and Miri Make a Porno. And this is a very first world type of problem to be talking about, like, you know, we had to wait for a phone call where they'd give us millions of dollars. But, you know, it's one of those things where you're like, I'd rather not be sitting around and staring at the phone like, you know, like I'm back in high school waiting for the prom date to call. I'd rather just do something else. And even if I'm not making money doing it, who gives a fuck? Just be creative, be productive, produce. It's, you know, it's the only weapon that I got against anybody that's like, he fucking sucks. And I'm like, yeah, but I do a lot. You know, that's it. It's the more you do, the more of a chance that you'll do something that somebody doesn't think sucks. You know, there's Jason Reitman was on one of our podcasts once, the director, and his dad is a director, Ivan Reitman. And he said that the best advice that his dad ever gave him was make as many movies as you possibly can. He's like, after Ghostbusters, I slowed down because I was waiting for another Ghostbusters, and those are few and far between. He's going, so I didn't make it, I was selective, didn't make as many movies. It's like, now I wish I had. So I remember hearing that. He'd said that on one of our podcasts years ago, and I was out of filmmaking, and I was like, wow, that would have been the way to do it. Just keep making flicks. So when I came back to it with Tusk, I was like, maybe that's the move. Just keep your head down and fucking produce. Like, you can't fight City Hall how they're going to do at the box office. You can't fight how they're going to be received, good or bad. The only thing you can do is just make the movie that you want to see, man, or record the podcast you want to record, or make the television show you want to make, and do it, you know, in your own voice, because there's no guarantee that it'll stick around. So at least if it dies, you'll be like, we did exactly what I wanted to do. You know, Tusk came out, did not light the world on fire at the box office by any stretch of the imagination, but I have no regrets. I don't go like, you know, I wish we'd opened in fewer theaters, that's about it. But other than that, I'm like, this is exactly what I wanted, you know, like, and it happened. So enjoy it. And that's how I try to approach everything, and that's why I'm able to keep the projects going, because I like doing this stuff. Like, it's not hard work. You know, it would be different if like every job was like, well, this one you got to pull the nails off small children. This one you got to build coffins for babies. You know, that's the real world. I don't exist in the real world. So while I'm non-existent in the real world, I might as well keep producing. Sooner or later, something's going to connect with somebody. You know, and that's kind of the secret. Weed helps as well.
I got to ask you about podcasting, because you're like the Orson Welles of podcasting. I'm on 4 or 5 podcasts. I'm not up to your Olympic style.
It doesn't matter how many you do. It doesn't make you any better at the job, oddly enough.
It's been in those projects, as people say, because somebody said to me, what could you possibly talk about Indiana Jones for 7 years? You. And I go...
Did you see yourself on the screen, too?
What?
Did you see the clip?
I got stuck with Klaus Janson
in our the Indiana Jones.
I wasn't supposed to talk about that because I signed a non-disclosure. Said he'd killed me.
There's a little... Yeah, in the sizzle reel.
Oh, well, I know I'll be on it.
Yeah, you're there.
All right, but anyway, going back to that, though, isn't that cool when you do podcasts? Because you really don't. You ever maybe Indiana Jones, you're making it up as you go. You guys, I listen to Babylon, I can tell when he's doing, what is it, Ed Wing? Yeah. You really don't know what you're going to do when you get out there. But isn't that what keeps...
That's part of the fun. Like, the fun of Hollywood Babylon is Ralph does all the work, and I just show up and giggle. So, you know, and try to add to the proceedings. But he has a fully prepared show, and I just get to show up, and the only difference between me and the audience is that I'm sitting on stage, but it's as fresh to me as the audience. I like that. That's pretty much how we do every podcast. Like, there's no real plan. Like, with Jason, when we do Jane, Silent Bob Get Old, I'm always like, do you have something to talk about tonight? And he's like, yes, and that's really all the prep we do now.
Well, I got to thank you, because I had Neil Adams at my Comic-Con last month in Connecticut.
Right on.
And that dude is like a college course on your show, and I told him that too. He's taught more about how to do business contracts and things like that.
He's amazing.
If you ever sit there and go, holy fuck, I'm listening to Neil Adams tell me the way life runs.
You can hear me.
30 years ago?
On that podcast, you can hear me probably. It's the quietest I've ever been.
Just absorbing.
Because he's a great talker, and all the shit he says is really interesting and interesting about the the business and part of the industry that I wasn't even around for. So yeah, every day I sit there and talk to anybody on that podcast. I'm always like, this is awesome, because it's the kid in me that like loved all that shit, sitting around talking to people that made that shit that I love.
Well, I gotta ask you a comic book question since it's comic book men. You know how everyone casts who would be Iron Man, who would be the Hulk, who the actor would be?
Yeah.
If you had to have an artist or writer draw and write the comic book men, comic book, anybody, Kirby, Neil Adams, who would you
living
pick?
or dead?
Living or dead, yeah. Who would you pick to draw?
I think Giffen and DeMatteis, they did a run on Justice League that was very comical when I was younger. Had a good sense of humor, and also that book looked phenomenal. So I would go with those. I mean, it's not the most obvious choice, but
that's a good
that's
answer.
what I would
I'll
go
tell
with.
Keith Giffen, he's a miserable bastard.
All right, you might like that.
So, since you're talking about people you've talked to, who would be the person living or dead you always wanted to talk to?
Dead, I mean, it was my old man, but I knew him and stuff, and we didn't talk that much when he was alive because he was one of those quiet dudes. And so, you know, I think about a few more years with him, I could have cracked him a little bit more. Mm-hmm. He didn't come from that world of like, you know, let's all talk about everything that ever happened to us ever and put it on recordings and share it. He wasn't even from the world of like, let's tell people how we feel. You know, he's kind of a quiet, reserved dude. And with all the conversation, all the podcasting I do, like he's the one guy I really regret not getting on a podcast. Right after him would be this guy Jim Jacks, who was a producer of Mallrats, who I know was such an amazing talker and assimilated and appreciated movies in a way that I've never seen anybody do before. And he would have been an excellent podcast guest, and I didn't get around to it, and he died. My father, he dropped dead about 10 years ago, 11 years ago, and that was before I was podcasting at all. So he liked shit like this. When I would go do a Q&A at a comic book show, he was there. In fact, one of the four last pictures taken of him the day he died was at Philadelphia at the Wizard Comic-Con. And my whole family, my mom and my dad, my brother and sister were in town for some reason. So they're like, we're going to go watch you talk. And I remember being like, please don't. Like, it's such a pain in the ass to get people in and out. Like, you've seen me say this shit a bunch. But they're like, no, Kevin, we're all going. I'm so glad they did, because there's a picture of me standing at a lectern talking and shit, and I'm wearing not this, but like I was wearing basketball shooters in those days. And you could see in the front row, there's a dude who's got a bald spot, looks exactly like mine, sitting in a wheelchair, and that was my father. So he went to that Q&A, and I remember after the Q&A, he was, you know, my mom is always very vocal and stuff. My dad would never really say like how he felt or whatever, but when we got off stage he was like, oh, that was fun. Like, he liked when I did that shit. So now in a world where I sit down and talk to like anybody, and I've done podcasts with my mother, and they're kind of rich and interesting and wonderful, at least to me. He's the one guy I wish I could have put on tape. Like, could you imagine? I would have found out so many things that will remain a mystery to me for the rest of my fucking life. Not about his life, but about who I am. Like, so much of who I am is predicated on who he was. And I never got to crack the nut and find out exactly who he was, the way that I have with like everybody else in my life. So that's the one I regret. Him and Jesus. Jesus might be interesting.
Oh,
Yeah, Jesus, just to be like, were you real? All right, can you calm these people down? Like,
Do some tricks.
yeah, let me see some fucking wine. It's something different.
So, speaking about Tusk, for a little, could we get back to that? I know it opened the door to a lot of other upcoming projects. Are there any details you could share with us about what's coming up
It
next?
did. Tusk, oddly enough,
It was disturbing.
It's a weird, yeah, it's a weird movie.
It was.
I really wanted.
I wanted to say Walrus. No, he's the one.
Walrus, yes.
It was inspired.
It was. It's. I don't know. It's. They'll be talking about that movie till the day I die, which I'm happy about. Like, if you could create something where people are still like, what the fuck, and some people are like, yay the fuck. That was it was weird. I should have been punished because it didn't do well, but instead we got rewarded. And so Starstream, the company that's producing Yoga Hosers, they came on after they saw Tusk. Kim Ledford, who runs the company, fell in love with Tusk, and so I was like, hey, we're gonna make this little spin-off movie where we take the two girls from the convenience store and Johnny's character, Guy Lapointe, and they come back in this other movie, Yoga Hosers. So it was a movie about two 15-year-old girls fighting like supernatural forces. She was like, this is a no-brainer. It's cheap. It was like $5 million. So at the end of the day, like, that's my secret. I just don't ask for a lot of money. I'm like, you know, like Tusk was under 3, it was like 2.8. Yoga Hosers very cheap. Clerks 3 will be about 5 million probably as well. As long as I keep the budget at a certain point, there's always somebody out there who's like, oh my God, I loved Clerks. Boom. And they give you money.
What's directing one of the Daredevil TV shows or the new Marvel TV shows?
They don't ask a guy like me. Never.
They talk a lot on those shows. You read Bendis.
You would think, but no, I'm not the guy that gets asked for that shit. Honestly, like anything in the Disney family, I'll never get asked to do. Like I worked at Disney 20 years ago. Certainly not after Tusk. Nobody looks at Tusk and goes like, let's give that guy Ant-Man. Like it doesn't happen like that. But to be fair, like I love those movies and I love watching them, and I fucking watch Iron Man, still the first one, over and when I'm bored, it's my go-to. It's a perfect fucking film. But I can't make movies like that, and I have no interest in making movies like none whatsoever. I would rather do my own. Like, why do somebody else's fucking thing? There are so many other people out there to make superhero movies of the characters that exist. Like, I'm here, if I'm gonna do it, to do it with like a character that I create. Like, that's why I got close with the Green Hornet and pulled out, because I was like, it's not mine. Like, as much as I love this and stuff, like, if I'm gonna spend a bunch of money to make one of those movies, I want it to be on something I came up with, not something else. Like, there's somebody else to direct those movies. There's a long line of people who are happy to direct a superhero movie. If I'm gonna do it, I'd rather make this shit up, and that's what Yoga Hosers is. It's about as close as I get to a comic book movie, but it's not superhero comics. It's more like eerie comics or creep shows.
What made you want to do like 3 Canadian like horror movies? Like,
after Tusk, I had such a good time making Tusk. I was like, oh my God, I don't want to leave fake Canada. I want to stay in fake Canada and keep making rubber monster movies. So Robert Kurtzman, who's the guy that did the makeup and shit, I said, dude, I want to do another one after this. And I explained the Yoga Hosers villains, and he was like, oh, I'm in. And then when I started talking about Moose Jaws, I guess he'd heard it like I'm one of the podcast, fucking Moose. He's going, I was born to make the Moose for Moose Jaws. I was like, absolutely. Jaws is a big favorite for a lot of us of that generation. So he was way into it. So it was that. It was because I grew up watching movies like that. Like, I didn't grow up watching Clerks and shit. I made Clerks. I grew up watching stuff like the 4:30 movie out here, where every week they'd have Ape Week, or they would have fucking Monsters Week, like a Godzilla Week. They would have Nature Gone Awry Week, where it's like Empire of the Ants and Food of the Gods.
They reissued Killer Shrews.
And that was the amazing thing. It was from 4:30 till 6 o'clock with commercials. So they literally cut every movie down to an hour. Like Planet of the Apes, I never knew it began on a fucking spaceship until I got the Laserdisc years later. I was like, this must be the special edition.
Killer Shrews is coming back out on the DVD.
Is it really? That's awesome. 4:30 movie, From Beyond, Reanimator, like the rubber movies in 80s cable, that was the stuff that I fucking loved. So I never could make one of those movies when I was younger. I could only make stuff like Clerks. Years later, I'm like, all right, I don't have anything to say like I did back when I made Clerks, because I'm happy and older and settled and shit like that. And happy people don't make good art. So I figure happy people at least can make interesting art. And that's what I'm doing with the Tusk thing. Try to do interesting shit.
Tell us about where you see comic book men going.
Hopefully to season 5. That'd be amazing. Season 4 starting on Sunday. We kind of nailed the show for exactly what it is, this deep into it, and it's mainlining nostalgia. That's what works about the show. Like the feedback that I read on Twitter and Facebook, they love the guys. They think the guys are funny, making fun of each other and shit. But the thing that people come back for over and over again is like, I had that when I was a child. I haven't been in a comic book store since I was a kid. This is one I get that I fucking love. I watch your show with my kid and we talk about ... I never do shit where people go like, I watched it with my kid. Like, I got shit where people are like, I won't even let my adult child watch your movie. So to have something where they're like, oh, we sit around and we watch your show because my kid can appreciate the current stuff and I can appreciate looking at the old stuff that comes through. So we kind of embraced that and went for a nostalgia fest, man. So this year, Adam West is on the show. Like last year we had a few people on, like Lou Ferrigno and Michelle Nichols. This year we're having Adam West came on, Billy D. Williams came on, Ernie Hudson came on, DMC came on. So for me, I don't know if the show will continue. I don't know how many people will watch it. We did well the last few years. They kept us around. But again, it's like one of those things where if it stays on the air or dies, I want to be like, this is a fucking show that I would watch, and it is. Like, and I don't even make it, like, I can't take credit for it. It's all the boys, Brian Nichelle, who's our showrunner and stuff, but they do all the heavy lifting. I just show up and say what happened in the story this week and try to make fucking jokes. So it's a wonderful job, and more than that, like, I get to turn on like my favorite network and watch Brian Johnson and Walter Flanagan, two guys I've been watching for 25 years, and I get to watch them on TV do the same shit I've seen them do in real life over and over. That to me is wonderful. God willing, we get to season 5, but I'm shocked we're at season 4. Like, when we opened in season 1, there were so many people who were like, fuck this show, that I thought we were finished. But water finds its level, and people found the show. Thanks to Netflix as well. A lot of people can binge the show, so I see that on Twitter a bit. So basically, in our 4th season, I kept saying it to the guys while we were shooting, and the Cole cast and crew, the crew rather. It's not really a cast, but I kept saying, like, I've seen 6 of the cut episodes already this season. You guys have got this show down to a science. Like, it's its own unique little entity. Doesn't look or play like any other unscripted shit. So I don't know. Hopefully, we'll just continue what we've been doing, which has got us to a season 4. Not upset the apple cart.
No cousin Oliver's coming on yet.
No. Although my kid does. She's in the first episode, so that might be the beginning of jumping the shark. Once you start bringing children onto the
Bring a
show.
monkey on.
We do, and you know what? We have a baby this season.
I was gonna say Min gets pregnant.
There's a baby.
Bye guys. Thank you.